Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of BootUP. I am joined here by my awesome co-host Nick and Peter and Nish from Agrian and Asa from Parsley. We are doing a special insight look into the food and agro industry today. Before I go any further, let me introduce myself properly. I am a senior technical evangelist at AWS and a former startup founder. I'm very passionate about startups. And basically what I do is I speak to developers and I teach them how to build on AWS. And I love it when I get to speak to startups especially. It's the best day ever. Let's go ahead and everybody can introduce themselves.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nick Walsh. I am also a technical evangelist at AWS, and I love being able to help developers build awesome technology on AWS's products. Similar to Nikki, previous to this I was at a startup, working particularly in the AI and machine learning space, and I really enjoyed all of the ways AWS was valuable there, and I'm excited to showcase some really amazing use cases from other companies that are doing similar things.
And I'm Peter Brandt. I work with Nish here at Agrian, and we're from the Central Valley, California, Fresno area.
I'm Nish, the co-founder and CEO of Agrian.
I'm Asa, the co-founder and CTO of Parsley. We do back-of-house sort of logistics and inventory and purchasing management for restaurants and other food manufacturing businesses.
So let's actually dive deeper. What do you guys do? Because we didn't hear that.
Go ahead.
What does Agrian do?
So one of the big problems you have in ag today is it is a very distributed network. Growers, agronomists, applicators, food companies, grower, packer, shipper, handlers, and they're all operating in their own system. So what Agrian does is we create a platform that they all standardize on. So growers, agronomists, applicators work with Agrian in the field. We normalize their workflows. We provide liability mitigation, risk management. Essentially, we ensure that everything they do in that field is safe or organic in compliance with the label and the law. Then we provide transparency when we share that food up to food companies. So every Sun-Made raisin, every Ocean Spray cranberry, every Lamb Weston potato, all of those things, 100% are documented by the growers working in the field in Agrian, the agronomist working with those growers, sharing that up to those food companies, and then ultimately on to consumers.
How did the communication take place before you guys existed?
All paper.
Wow.
So our greatest competitor, even today, is still what they say, a big chief notepad. Yeah.
Wow. And so you mentioned briefly what you guys do. Did you want to dive a little deeper for those of us that don't own restaurants?
First, I just wanted to say exactly the same thing. Most of our customers were doing all this on paper.
So you're competing with paper as well?
Yes, for the most part.
Which is a great adversary, right?
Some of the most savvy ones use Excel.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
the tougher competitor.
So paper and Excel are your competition.
Yes. So restaurants and food service, food manufacturing in general, are a very low margin business, and they have, compared to revenue, a very complex manufacturing process. One way to think of it is as a factory that produces lots of very small custom orders. And because it's so low margin, every little bit of food saving is very important. It's very important to keep track of your costs because, 10% savings can double your profit margin.
And food gets wasted when it gets bad.
Yeah. So it's very important to them to both be able to track what does the cost of a particular product, and also to track exactly what do they need to purchase and what do they have in inventory so that they don't overorder, they don't underorder.
Got it.
So that's a complicated thing. The big companies like McDonald's, Burger King, they have internal software where they pay a lot of money to SAP-style companies to get that done. And anything, smaller than, but these companies, these companies that sell that big SAP-style software don't talk to anyone who doesn't have 10 locations or more.
Got it. So the smaller, boutique restaurants, or the restaurant that's a one-off, or
even a chain of 10 restaurants, or meal delivery service, a meal delivery service like Good Eggs. They're not big enough.
They don't have the software. So then they just do it now with paper and Excel.
Yeah. Some managing chef spends 3 hours a night sitting and doing all these calculations. Yeah, it's pretty horrific.
So you save chefs time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how do you guys see like the agro-food space as it stands right now? Because you can talk a lot about the food industry, I'm sure, and you guys are deeper into agro, but how do you see the space at large? Like, is it hard to get things done? Is there a lot of regulation in your face? Or is it easy for somebody to just go start a food or agro startup right now?
It's very, well, so in our side of the supply chain, there's just tons of money coming into it. So lots of money going into biologicals, ag tech generally, both hardware and software. So there's an explosion of point solutions. So that is a challenge because we tend to think that you go into all of these businesses. You talk about business, we think, and every business has a workflow that makes them profitable.
Right.
And it's understanding and building a system that can accommodate that workflow. And that workflow changes in ag in every farming operation. There is no standardization in workflows. In every crop, it changes. In crops in regions, grapes in Northern California are grown much differently than grapes in Central California because of the economics of wine grapes as opposed to table grapes.
Right.
And so what you really need to do is understand those workflows, build out some exciting tools, and go out and get adoption. But there's so much money coming in with people just addressing a point of the solution, and they go raise lots of money. But the challenge we have is building out a platform as opposed to an accumulation of a series of overfunded features. Mm-hmm. That's a big problem in ag today. Is there's lots of money going in ag tech, lots of little features, but they're all creating all these little disparate data sets that you really need to normalize. It
needs to be one data set.
Well, absolutely, because on top of all of this is local, state, federal rules and regulations, food safety regulations, and the reality is, in some of the things we do, if we do it wrong, in the worst case scenario, well, I'll say in the best case scenario, you lose the crop. In the worst case scenario, people die. You apply a crop protection material, you apply it near a school, you apply it near water, you apply too much fertilizer, bad things happen environmentally or to the public. And so from death all the way up to just losing the crop, it's a high-risk, high-volume game when, for example, in Agrian, we documented in 2018 74% of every application in California, 74% of the time was done through our system. That's a lot of volume and a lot of exposure, especially when it comes to local, state, and federal rules that are constantly changing. So it's very exciting space to be because it's not boring. There's always something new coming up. 2017, the state of California created a new rule, which we think is a good rule, that creates buffer zones around every school. And if you wanted to apply something on a field near that school, there were hours when you couldn't do it, and then there's a buffer zone.
Look at this. This is great.
So what we had to do, and literally they passed that rule in September, and that went into effect in January. So we had to have a system that essentially georeferenced every school, which we have a pretty sophisticated system. Then we had to create a buffer zone around that school. Then we had to track all applications during certain times in those buffer zones. And when that was wanted to be done, they called notice of intent, we would have to inform the school that that was going to happen. And then we had to document this. And in a high volume, high risk setting that, literally kids are on the line. So it's a fun, it's fun for me. I don't know if it was so much fun on his side of the office.
Yeah, this is crazy. This almost seems like the mad dash to make sure companies are almost like GDPR compliant, right, in Europe. But lives are at stake directly here. So this is clearly a huge thing.
We just finished that too, and that's a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking a step back, clearly you work in a space that has so many different stakeholders. On the topic of not wanting to be a bit of a laundry list of individual solutions, how do you even get started, or how did Agrian specifically get started trying to approach this really complex system of problems?
So Agrian's my second company. I started my first company in like '98 and sold it to a Bay Area company in February of '99, like a month and a half before everything went really bad. And then we moved up here and it was great. For a couple months. And then, but I ended up staying with that company for 3 years, finished my earnout, and then bought the assets of a company in Fresno. And This time I wanted to be privately held and geared towards a profitable business as quickly as I could get to, almost as bootstrapped as I could be. And so we just built it slowly and organically. And the first thing we did is we found a feature set that our customers cared about. I went out to customers who wanted that feature set, and then I got them to invest in us with excellent terms, because I'm giving them something and I'm giving them a stake in this future platform. And most of those people are still investors in Agrian today, and they've helped us to grow organically without, third-party VC or private equity financing. And when you have users as investors, it really helps you focus on what's important, and they provide you with a lot of capital to grow. I mean, Kickstarter campaigns are really the modern version of what we did. So
that's awesome that you did it pretty much probably before that was like a thing.
Yeah, it was not a fun thing at the time.
Asa, how about you? How did Parsley get its start?
We started out basically as users. Hava, who is my co-founder and the CEO of Parsley, was running a food delivery business, and I was at the time in college and wrote her up software to manage her logistics. It was the kind of thing where she would change the menu every week. Every week she would get a bunch of orders by Friday or by Saturday evening, and she would need to shop, cook, deliver by Monday morning. So she could not, sit down and do that calculation, and she would need to redo that calculation every week if she was going to change the recipes, which was important to her business. So we wrote up some software to handle that for her automatically. And then, because she is a networking machine, she showed it off to a lot of restaurant people she met, and they really wanted something very similar to that. And it was a bit of a technical mess, so we didn't really want to. It was very hard to disentangle from her specific front end. Yeah, and also just in general, I was in college. I was not a very good coder. And also I was spending the next few years at Meraki. That's a networking equipment startup that has since been acquired by Cisco, which I highly recommend both as a product and as an employer. And then after 3 years, I decided I wanted to actually make this happen. So I left Meraki. Hava cut down her consulting work. She's been in the startup world for quite a while.
Yeah.
And took about a year and a half to actually get a product out, and now we're there. Yeah.
Looks like we actually have a specific question from the audience for you, Asa. Chuck Lee asks, so I'd love to know from Asa, keeping in mind the low margins and natural aversion to limit expenses, what strategy does Parsley utilize to get subscribers to subscribe to SaaS, particularly when the buy-in involves data entry from the user?
Two things. First off is low price. Specifically, we wanted to find a price point and a trial period that would make it kind of an impulse buy. And second off is, which is more important, is to find a specific stakeholder to be our advocate. Usually it's the chef who is the one who's spending, an hour or 3 a night doing this work. They really want to avoid that.
Right.
We get them bought in, we give them a demo, and then they end up selling it to management. Unless they're like a chef owner, in which case they're sold. Yeah.
One step sell.
Yeah. So finding that internal advocate is very important.
Looks like there's a general question for everyone here. Kenneth Fax asks, do you find that the funding for each food startups, or for any food startups, are stronger in certain geolocations? I don't know if you guys, either of you would know, but if you have an opinion.
I would say that startup funding, it's a lot easier to do it in the Bay Area, just because everyone's based here. So like we've started out with focusing on SF restaurants, and that's SF restaurants, SF food delivery startups, and that's very useful because we happen to live here, but it's also useful because then we can go to investors and say, hey, we have buy-in from so-and-so restaurant that you go to once a week.
Right.
And they love us, and that's very easy to do.
Because of course they want their food, so.
Yeah, but also it makes them feel like they understand the product.
Got it.
Which is very important for investors.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about how you guys got your start. What was the biggest challenge you faced in getting off of the ground?
For us, I would say that we were bootstrapping. We were bootstrapping for a year and a half or two. It was very lucky to me that Hava had savings, and I had a pretty good payout from the acquisition of Meraki by Cisco. But it was hard to get investment without having a product to demonstrate.
Yep.
And the minimum viable product was
It takes time
actually
to build.
surprisingly large. It depends on the business, actually. Minimum viable product for some companies can take a month to build. For us, it took a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Same thing with us. We were all living off of our savings, and I had an exit, and so you blow through that pretty quick because you're funding a team, you're funding everything. But and the other thing is we have a database which is indemnified by the manufacturer of all inputs that you can put on a field. So if you're going to put something on the field, we have that in a database that the manufacturer of that product has reviewed and assumed liability for. It took us a while to build that data set up. Imagine if you're going to a doctor and everything that he prescribes or she prescribes is in a database that, Bayer, whomever approved. We did that same thing for crop protection inputs. That took a while, and then understanding what the minimum viable product for multiple classes of users was. So we needed an MVP for a grower and an MVP for an agronomist, which is like a plant doctor that uses that database to write prescriptions for fields. And then we needed an MVP for the guy or gal, the crew that applies that crop protection material or nutrient or seed on a field, runs the tractor. And then we need an MVP for the food company, and then we need to link all that stuff together. And
You have
all
like
of
a
that.
lot of different
It was
players
a series
there.
of MVPs, yeah.
It was, and it is really, really hard. But that is the agri-food supply chain, and it's all the same data moving to all of those people. They all have a part to contribute to that data set. It's a really, really complex problem, but it just takes time to go out and understand the needs and assemble that. But when you build that network, it's very, very powerful. And when that network, if you build that network in a way that it can self-replicate, meaning we can drop in the tools and then the users, the grower, the agronomist, the applicators, they assemble their own private networks in the way that works for them. Once they start doing that and growing it, it happens fast, and it's fun to watch.
How long did it take to build all those MVPs?
So it took us 4 years just to get
4
to
years. Wow.
just to get to the point. We could do any one of those. We could do the grower thing in the first year, then the agronomist thing took another year and a half. Then we got into food, but by 4 years we had critical mass on the data, and we had this network going. But when we started, we had nothing in the West. I mean, no adoption. It was a token amount of use. But after a decade of doing it, we're by far the largest in the country, at least, and if not the world.
Were you able to market those individual products while you were working on the full suite?
We were, but like restaurant owners, growers are very frugal. And so we had one class of free. So we still have a free class of most of our applications that we provide out to users. And then we encourage them to go up to a higher paid level. It's a modified freemium model, but it served us very well, because at the end of the day, we just want people making safe decisions when it comes to the way they grow food. And so we're going to give them free tools to make those safe decisions, and they're going to be paid tools. And the paid tools are really around business process automation, integration into the larger network, integration into the ERP, but we're still always going to provide that free level around compliance, government reporting, those types of things. So we do our good works, but we also help control the network. And so we're in a strange position in the market where we are the broadest free offer, and we're also the broadest, highest end paid offer. And it's kind of, it's a fun place to be.
Interesting. So yeah, it sounded like there was a very large technical barrier to entry in the beginning to build out this complex suite of products that work well together. But then the platform effects seem to have worked very well to grow from that point.
Well, and the other challenge we had is it was in the early days, so we were still working with servers and colos and this is not an AWS plug, but AWS has really helped out a lot.
We will get there. I promise you, we will get there.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience really quick, though, specifically for Agrian. Paysbro20 asks, do you see consumer prices eventually falling as the platform gains widespread adoption, or is population growth and regulatory costs offsetting the efficiencies gained?
Do you want to?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's all you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So we had an informal agreement. I'll take all the non-technical questions. So the reality is, so there's a lot of these improvements coming into the supply chain, organic certification, but growers are not being paid for those. So there's a cost, but really the supply chain is just requiring that of growers. They're requiring higher levels of certification. I don't see the cost of food going down because it is becoming much more regulated. All those regulations have a cost associated with that. But I do think that the cost to a user, a grower or an agronomist, is going down. The challenge you have is now you have a class. So what we don't do is we don't wrap our service around a product. So there's a lot of companies that want to sell you Bayer Crop Science or Monsanto. They want to sell you a seed or a crop protection input or something like that. And then they want to give you the technology if you use their input. That is not our model. Our model
To grow it, basically, right?
To grow it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They bundle it all together. So they bundle technology and inputs so that they're getting the real dollars from the sales and they're giving away the technology. Our model is not to wrap our product around another product. Our model is you have a need for business process automation. You have a need to grow safely and sustainably. We're going to provide that to you. And then you can work with any product, not just one. But it creates for interesting dynamics in the market because ostensibly a grower could get a product for free in some markets, but it would require them buying inputs from a specific manufacturer in which to do that. And that gets hard. It's a very, very ag is a very complex supply chain, as I'm sure food is.
Yeah. Although what's nice is that we pick one very small segment. We are dealing with the restaurant, and the restaurant sends orders to their suppliers, and those suppliers actually internally handle very complex supply chains. But we managed to cut a lot of that out because restaurants generally manage to cut a lot of that out by going through these intermediaries.
Yeah.
The middleman actually does provide quite a bit of value.
Like a food broker or like a...
Yeah. I don't know what they would call them internally in the business, but they generally call them restaurant suppliers. It's companies like Cisco, not the Cisco that tech people know, but SYSCO.
Saladino's is one.
For Bay Area people, actually Buy Right has a restaurant supply branch. I assume that deals more with like organics and exotics, but yeah, those are the things.
So we heard a bit about Agrian's early challenges. What were the biggest challenges for Parsley? You mentioned before that most of your customers are centered around the Bay Area, but because you're not doing deals with larger enterprises that have tech built in-house, what is the challenge like to get in the door with a lot of these chefs or to be able to iterate and design your product?
Getting in the door with chefs just for the sake of getting revenue is actually surprisingly easy because, well, there is a subset of the market which is relatively young and tech savvy and is used to just going online and signing up for a web app.
Like the newer chefs that are starting restaurants? Or...
Yeah, basically anyone under 30.
More specifically.
More specifically. Which, by the way, there's actually a lot of them in that there's a lot of startups in the sense of people start businesses relatively early.
Right,
there's
and
a very high
restaurants.
failure. Yeah, there's a very high failure rate, but then they go on to other businesses. So it's actually, people go online, they'll get the trial for 2 weeks. Getting product iteration is a little bit more difficult in that we need to have a pretty close relationship with a customer that is willing to really spend time, sit down with us, show us their workflow, which is kind of the challenge for any product that has a UI and that isn't selling to other techies, in that you actually need to understand the user and their business flow. So if it was helpful that Hava had some experience in food service food manufacturing, because that kind of gave us that initial bit of understanding of the market.
Like, right, she can empathize with the customer because she has understanding of what they're doing.
And just in a concrete way, she's done the use case. There are certain things where we don't need to reach out to a customer and ask, okay, like, how the hell do you do purchasing? We actually do.
She knows.
In the end, actually, we did need to. For that, that's a bad example because it's not true. Because her purchasing was very different. She did purchasing after she knew exact demand. Restaurants have a harder problem because they need to anticipate demand. But yeah.
So in talking about your products, like, what does your AWS architecture look like today, and how has it evolved over time?
For us, it hasn't really evolved over time in that we're a relatively simple app.
By the way, feel free to show us if you have.
Oh, yes. I have a little diagram, which is not very complex, if you can put that one up.
Yeah, let's see.
How much can I zoom this guy in? Oh, zooming here doesn't work. There we are.
There you go.
So basically, it's a pretty basic web app where you have app server, database server, and S3. In a lot of local setups, in fact, in our Devel setup, the database and the app server are on the same machine.
That's the EC2.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one's EC2. This is actually a micro instance.
And then you have RDS.
RDS we have RDS for the database, mostly just because that way we can let Amazon handle management, upgrades, backups. We're very labor constrained. We're very labor constrained. So having someone else deal with that is very nice. And then we store anything that would give us like performance issues, that is static assets. It's mostly user assets, user provided assets like their logos, so that they can add that onto their purchase orders, things like that in S3. And what's nice about this is we can kind of take this whole system and copy it. Right now manually, but at some point we'll script that if we end up doing it a lot. Like if we need to do sharding.
Using a CloudFormation template?
CloudFormation template, manual scripting, not sure exactly. And copy this over. We've already done this a few times. So like this whole system exists once as a test environment, once as a staging environment, and once as a production environment.
And where is RDS leading to? What is that at?
That's the backup.
Oh, okay.
That's the backup that is run by Amazon.
Got it.
Yeah, so that's basically it there. The setups are relatively simple.
Do you see your architecture evolving more over time, or do you see you guys incorporating some ML services, or?
In the future, I suspect at some point we'll run into performance problems, especially because now we're doing historical analytics, which is always where this kind of...
Yep.
That was also at Meraki. Like the big performance problems was history. People have an insatiable appetite for really high resolution historical data going back years.
Yep.
And at that point, we're going to have to do some sharding. Basically having one subset of customers on one instance of that whole architecture.
Right.
And we're basically going to need to copy them over. Like have one copy that handles 100 customers, another customer that, and so on. And so we're basically going to have to make that system easy to copy. And we're going to need to put some kind of router, not router in the networking sense, but router in the like a web sense, where when a user logs in, we direct them to the right shard.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that like within that black box, I think everything's going to be the same for a long time.
Got it. Yeah. Pretty simple. Really cool.
At Agrian.
Yeah. So we've been a Rails shop for quite a while, so we've taken advantage of EC2, and we have so much geospatial data. You can probably imagine that Postgres and PostGIS have come in handy over the years, but most of the functional areas are kind of their own services. So one Rails instance for this and one for that, and a database for each, and then Elasticache for caching. And but where everything kind of got tricky, we started out with record keeping, kind of basic profile information, we call it, but that'd be your grower with your field boundaries, the spatial areas, and some basic attributes for those. And that was pretty easy to store in RDS, but once we started getting machine data and satellite imagery, immediately kind of started another effort we call it, the team is the analytics team, but similar problems where customers want historical information, they want to be able to analyze it on the fly, they want to look at large volumes of information.
I want to see everything.
They want everything, right? And you kind of have to build for that possibility. So we kind of had a different team, started a different stack that's really complementary. We use a Scala kind of based architecture. We use a
Scala as well?
Yeah.
Okay,
cool.
so
Yeah, our
both
entire app
Scala,
server is in Scala.
All right, well, there you go.
Guys,
Yeah.
Scala, if you like Scala.
Yeah.
That's what all the cool kids are
where you should
using.
go to work.
Yeah, or at least, yeah. So we started that for that kind of purpose. The Rails side serving us very well for the other purposes. We kind of just recreate these actual Rails services as needed when there's a new functional area that's kind of separate in its concerns from others. And yeah, I mean, overall, in the analytics space, we make heavy use of S3. We used to store a lot of terabytes and terabytes of data in single Postgres instances on RDS, which if you can make it work, right? But once we started redesigning it a little bit, we started moving that out into S3 and processing its jobs and accessing that information using sort of an indexing scheme that the bucket is structured in a certain way so we can spatially find where we're going, or we have a pointer in another database. So
you could use like Athena to run queries on your S3 bucket.
We could, but that data tends to be like raster data, so it's pixels basically.
Okay.
So we have other similar things that we would access all that and kind of essentially map reduce it if we need to. But yeah, as far as the design is concerned, it's fairly stabilized. I think as we added that analytics side to what was a really simple to maintain Rails component, we now have a really broad. If we did a diagram, it would be really broad, but the technologies at play are pretty consistent.
And any interest in incorporating machine learning in the future?
Yeah, we do that now. We kind of just recently started a data science team that's part of our analytics group, so we kind of have a platform team and a data science team. And that data science team is largely Python, but they tap into like most of the data that's being produced by that analytics side, which is being consumed from the Rails apps and from other third-party sources. So we use SageMaker for that. We've had, it's been great. We kind of got in there a little early, and a lot of the things that we were wanting kind of just showed up, and so that was helpful. Yeah, so the ML side of it is interesting. We're doing a lot there. We have more proposals than we can start working on at any given time.
I'm sure you guys have a lot of data at this point.
It is, yeah, I was going to use a little number earlier, but yeah, I mean, there's...
You can share a number.
So we at one point, one of our, the machine data that's coming from the field, from equipment, there's a whole slew of sensors on that machinery. So if you're thinking of like a combine, right, that thing has numerous sensors that are sampling at a really high frequency, and all that data needs to be processed to make it useful. And so that data comes through various means into our system, and we have to process that to make it make sense and clean it and prepare it and summarize it, make it visualizable. And everybody wants to visualize it their own little way, and everybody wants to analyze it in their way. So yeah, there's a...
They're very early adopters of IoT.
Yeah,
stuff.
it's funny, and some of this stuff's been around since the late 90s, right?
Yeah,
it's just,
yeah.
It didn't have a cool name back then, but now it's getting better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of like basically we've looked at a few industrial manufacturers of food, and every industrial system has that kind of thing built in. It's just sort of percolating down to lower value assets now.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible amount of data in very narrow windows in the season. All the combines are out harvesting. Everything is out seeding. So
yeah, but I mean, so you mentioned that everybody had a point solution at some point, and we've kind of collected them into a platform. There's a huge burden of bringing all that data together and making it make sense.
Right.
And then you have the ongoing seasonal data of every time they spray or fertilize or plant or harvest, there's all this other stuff.
That could be like daily, right?
Yeah, it can be very frequent, right? And so that's all happening. And there was a period where we had in the tens of billions of rows in one Postgres database of geospatial data, and it was not tenable, right? So we've redesigned and started pushing that out to S3 and have a whole design for that now. And it's been working well. And now we actually have a great kind of, I think now we call those data lakes, but it's basically like a data lake, and there's
Data lake.
I know that name never really worked for me, but
weird,
SageMaker is on there.
Description.
I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, well, they talk
you
about it a lot now.
You haven't talked to a lot of McKinsey people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I have not.
Yeah, lucky you.
My sister actually, for a second, applied. Was looking at McKinsey, but she decided to stay in law.
They like the data lake.
Yeah.
To follow up on that concept, though, I thought it was really interesting that these devices and some of these IoT concepts have existed for a while, but haven't really become popularized until recently. And a lot of that comes down to education, right? And so what role do you see your companies playing specifically with regards to educating the consumer about the tool that they need to buy almost to validate your own products so that they can get the value out of?
Well, so from our perspective, we go into a lot of farming operations, and they have great equipment in the field. So every piece of John Deere equipment from 2014 on, which, you know, in the Midwest, growers tend to cycle through new equipment every 2 years. So multiple generations of equipment has had a GPS, a cell modem, and in most cases, a controller that logs all of this IoT data, for lack of a better term. They are just not doing anything with it. So Deere has been a great partner to these growers. They have a portal called My John Deere, and Agrian, you know, has some features inside of My John Deere globally with Deere. But so many growers have a wealth of data available to them from their equipment, and no one's lit it up. So when we go into large farming operations or large ag retail operations, we say, listen, we've got this great platform. You want to start seeing value. Job one is every piece of equipment out there, we're going to light it up. We're going to wire it up into the platform.
Light it up.
And it's so you have an easy win. And that easy win is all the stuff I paid for is now giving me data every time it moves. And then all of a sudden, all the dashboards light up, and there's just all this value that's being created. I can see what's going on. I can manage my operation. And then we move into other data sets. Okay, now we're going to go out and collect all of your. One of the things we also do is we have a mobile device that will geo-reference locations in your field, and then we layer in the soil maps and other layers, and then we allow people to go out and pull cores of soil samples, take that soil sample to the lab does the analysis, and then we give them a geo-reference interpolated map of the soil in the field. And with that, we allow them to apply different types of material at higher or lower rates.
Like basically plant crops in different areas of the soil where it's going to best grow?
Well, that's one thing. So you could prioritize higher density of seed in a higher yielding area and less seed in a low yielding area. But what you really want to do, the key is, so one of the ways that you get excess nitrogen or phosphorus into rivers and waterways is when you do a flat rate across the field. But what we do is we geo-reference the field, we create zones. This is a high nitrogen zone, this is a low nitrogen zone, and then using that great equipment from Deere, that tool we have inside of My John Deere is a zone creator. So you can say, based on this map, the soil sample, high, low nitrogen, I'm going to apply less nitrogen in the high areas and more nitrogen in the low areas. Ultimately,
it's the optimal effect.
Yeah. The optimal effect, and it's great benefit to the environment, great benefit to the grower because they're spending less, and that's the kind of capabilities that modern technology is bringing to ag. Much of that has been there for years. There just haven't been good tools to access those capabilities, because it is a very complex process of linking the equipment with the soil sampler, with the lab, with the fertility engine.
And then showing it and displaying it to you in a readable, understandable way.
That's right.
And making a portal that standardizes all of that, like you were mentioning before, because John Deere is one player, but I'm sure there are countless other
multiple
providers in the space.
We work with many companies, but Deere in North America is a great leader in that space.
Tangential fun question. Do you guys work with wineries? I specifically wore a wine shirt today.
There we go.
To honor the agro-food industry theme.
We absolutely do work with wineries.
Because you were talking about the soil, and like I know a lot about different wines and like what kind of soil those grapes grow best in. And if you could analyze your entire field of your winery, you could actually grow different varietals of grapes the best if you knew where to put them.
I think 85% of the wine grapes in California are documented in our system.
Wow.
And we track 80,
guys, if you like wine,
80 unique,
to these guys.
80 unique data elements per acre in real time. And in many of those wineries, we've been doing it for over a decade. So we have tons of volumes about wine, wine grapes, table grapes, raisin grapes. You know, everyone thinks that it's just a grape, but they're all grown very, very
No, they're
differently.
very, very different.
Absolutely.
Like, Pinot likes moist, dense soil, and Cab likes usually a drier climate. They have very different.
Are you applying?
Yeah.
Because because
I
we've
know
got a
this
place
stuff.
for you.
I love wine.
Yeah.
My dad is a wine connoisseur, so I grew up on wine. But I know a lot about the different soils because he used to teach me when I was a kid. Like, if you pick a wine from this region, this soil is actually could produce a better grape than if you picked the same varietal from this region. And he's really good at telling me how to select wine.
So anybody who knows wine understands that, right? Understands the rootstock. And that is why we talk about this Surgo. There's United States benefits from a USGS layer called Surgo, which was a soil map that they created from the 60s, 70s,
and so on.
And so on. And we layer that into the system. So when you're creating a zone, you'll base it on Surgo, but people will also go out and pull soil samples so you know exactly, is this a sandy loam? Is it high in, what micros does it have an abundance of? And what do I need to supplement or not supplement? Can I just go, what is the organic matter on this field? Organic matter is a critical component in growing crops. And a lot of times, people just don't know what's going on in their soils. And so what we're trying to do is expose that to them in a very simple way.
So that they can grow more efficiently.
And more profitably, we say grow safely, profitably, and sustainably, right?
Speaking of wine, running a startup and co-founding a startup is an extremely tiring and stressful process. What gets you through the good times and the bad times? Like, is there a teddy bear? Is there a specific brand of ramen that gets you through the night? How do you sleep during the sleepless nights? Like, lay it on us. Asa, why don't we start?
Sleeping, a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of melatonin, and just sleeping like in the middle of the day if I'm tired. Just sleep.
Works.
Just sleep. I actually picked up that habit at Meraki of just like grab a couch, nap for an hour.
Naps are
I
powerful.
feel like when you're in the middle of a really hard coding problem, if you take a 20-minute nap, you come back and suddenly you know all the answers.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, and everything's just so much easier.
Really smart.
By the way,
but also,
you get over a certain age and you take a nap in your office, and people think, uh-oh.
Yeah, I can get away with it.
It works when you're young. Oh, that's kind of cool. You get
Social
a little bit of gray hair. It's like,
wake up, Grandpa.
Wake up, Grandpa.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. But also just having a social network, a support network. I get it mostly through social dance, but there are other ways to have.
What is social dance?
It's like partner dance, blues. I do a little bit of tango. That's a less common
you're
community.
talking about actually dancing. I thought you were like naming a social network called social dance. Like what?
No, like actual social dance. Just like having some social support network is like don't spend 12 hours a day and then not
take a break.
And then be isolated and not have any well, even not taking a break, but like day to day, like spend time on other things.
This was my own personal brand of
That's how you get through it.
Yeah.
Specifically Cab, wherever it is on the shirt. I think it's right there.
Third, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, to extend that, you said that it took almost 4 years before your first MVP, and in the crazy hustle and bustle of startups, everyone wants it faster, right? So to have the fortitude to do over 4 years, surely there were points where maybe you doubted yourself or things got tough. Could you talk to any of those and how you got past them?
So for the first 60 months of Agrian's life, I did not have payroll in the bank at the beginning of the month, 48 of those 60 months. So now, but you talk to the team, no one ever knew that, right? That's one of the burdens of being a founder is your job is to insulate the team from the drama of, the business, right?
Yeah.
And it's a heavy burden. Sometimes it's lonely, right? But our chief operating officer is my wife, and we've worked together for a long time, so she's a great support, and that's wonderful. And we just have a great team. We have a great team without any prima donnas. It's just we've worked really hard to create we like to have fun and get stuff done, happy warrior culture. But you have to build that slowly. You can't buy that, and you can't fake it. And you can't fake it, right? We actually work hard, and we don't really play hard as a team, but we do like our wine and beer. But you know, the other nice thing for like me, and I think for Peter at times, is we live in Fresno in the San Joaquin Valley, and so I'll cut out in the summer at 3 o'clock on a Friday. I'll go up into the Sierras and I'll be completely offline in 2 hours, and I'll just go camp and I'll be back by Sunday at noon, and it's just so relaxing to be completely turned off from the world. You deal with computers and screens so much, and in an hour to be in the middle of nowhere, I find it very relaxing.
Yeah. But even when you have for me, sometimes I'll leave and I won't completely disconnect. Obviously, you're still thinking, right?
Yeah.
But if I'll leave, I'll go on a hike, and I'll be able to think about the hard problem that I left behind, and I might come back with, a new way of looking at it. Maybe a nap can accomplish that too. I've been doing the hiking thing for now.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll hike together and just talk about things.
Yeah.
This isn't working. This part of the business isn't working. What do we think about this? And we just hike and talk about things. It's fun.
On that thing of like knocking off at 3 on a Friday and coming back on Sunday, I found that like you're a founder. You can design your own work schedule. Take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Like I work 6 days, like 6 short days a week, like Sunday through Friday. I know some people who like the medical version, which is 3 12s, 3 12-hour days a week. Find something that like supports your mental health, because I found that like supporting your own mental health is it's a part-time job that you have on top of founding a startup.
Well,
Totally.
and when we started Agrian, I told everyone this is not going to be a pump and dump company. Like, you're not going to work here for 3 years really hard and then we're going to sell it. So, get a lot done in 8 hours, but you have to come into work and kick ass, and then you have to go home and spend time with your family and decompress. Because if your life is only about this job, you're gonna start melting in a couple years. And that's why, over half of our team has been with us over 10 years, and a third of our team's been with us over 7 years. Because we hire people, we create a really steady environment, and then we just kind of keep building these cool, fun projects. And when you're private and profitable, you don't have that pressure to, go out to a new round and everything else. And it's a completely different way of running a business, but it does create a lot of peace when especially when you're in a stacking recurring revenue model where you sign contracts on 3 or 5 year terms. So now, we can look out and say, we know exactly what our revenue is going to be for the next 3 years at a minimum, and then it's all about managing growth. And it takes a long time. We weren't there for the first 5, 6, 7 years, but once you kind of get over that hump, then that recurring revenue is just magical.
Because your customers actually stay in business for 3 to 5 years.
But that's another exact. When you deal with social media, right? You got a lot of churn in your user base. When you deal with restaurants, there's a lot of churn in the user base, and that churn is hard, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So we have a couple minutes left here, and I just wanted to ask you guys 2 last questions, which one is, what advice do you want to leave the viewers with if there's like entrepreneurs out there, or they're thinking about starting a business? And then 2, are you hiring? Tell us about your roles available, and I will post the links as you're talking. So, Asa.
For entrepreneurs, I would say go in with clear eyes about how long it's going to take, how much capital you're going to need to sort of get through to actual revenue. I know some startup people who can only deal with it by kind of living in this dream world of, I cannot fail, everything is going to be perfect regardless. And if you're in that mental mode, this may not be the business for you.
Yep.
You kind of have to accept that, yes, this is a risky business. Prepare for that. Make sure you have a fallback, even if that fallback is only, it is worth the risk, but you have to manage it and make sure that, like, yes, I will have enough, like, the cutoff shouldn't be I have 0 money in the bank. It should be I have enough to find another job or whatever. And yes, we are hiring. Although I guess I'll go to that after you talk about advice stuff.
We're hiring too. Again, we did it different because we didn't go VC private equity. But I would say for me, and you kind of alluded to it, you're out selling it. You're selling your software. You're selling your service. You're really optimistic, doing all these things, but don't lie to yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you know you've got a limited runway. You know how hard it is. If you start lying to yourself, you start doing bad deals. You want to really be honest with yourself. This is hard. Here are my risks. But I'm going to continue to work to overcome those risks. And I'm going to work to manage those risks. And one of the ways that we really focused on managing our risk as a business is by controlling our costs. And I think a lot of people raise money and they start spending money like drunken sailors. And next thing you know, they can't pivot well because they're, and so what we've always focused on is we're going to try a whole bunch of things. We're going to fail at a lot of them, but none of those things are going to break the bank because we've always run a tight ship. The reason we went to Fresno, when I started Agrian, I lived in Lafayette in the East Bay. Great life, great town, had an office right above a jewelry store, and you know, I mean, it was perfect, right? But you can't scale in a cost-effective way up here. So we went down to Fresno. We hired our first office was literally a roll-up door in an underground parking garage, under concrete floors. The rains would come, the floor would flood. We'd have to move the internet, the Cat5 cables. I mean, but that has really helped us because we controlled our destiny. We could go through all of the early, we thought we were going to monetize this way. We thought we were going to monetize this way. Yeah. We could do all those pivots without giving up huge chunks of equity in exchange for the pivot. And now we still control our destiny. And that, I feel really good about that, but it is really hard to do. Yeah. So.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And we're hiring, and so about that. Yeah.
Careers at Agrian.com.
Okay, so there's a couple people asking about your stacks, by the way. I know you guys mentioned them, but I dropped in Scala if you want to say anything else.
We're a little broader than that, so we are always looking for people who want to work on Rails. Scala, of course, as well. Data science, we're Python, and a little Scala doesn't hurt. And then we also just started some stuff where we're using a lot of JavaScript. We're using AppSync. And we make heavy use of lambdas, and we've been using JavaScript for those lambdas too. So pretty broad stack. You can kind of, if you're interested in any of those things, you're going to want to email careers@agrian.com.
Careers@agrian.com. Okay, I'm posting that in the chat for you all.
And on the machine learning side, you said you were using SageMaker more recently?
SageMaker, that's right. Yep. So we've been using SageMaker. And if you're wanting to work with a global data set relating to the things that we eat or the things that we grow, there's a lot there, and it is very diverse, and I think everybody who dives in finds it really interesting.
Awesome. Great to hear it.
Yeah. So we are we're mostly working in Scala and JavaScript.
Okay.
We're kind of agnostic. I'm not too openly wedded to either of those, but we just don't have that many systems around. If we had more systems, we'd probably have more languages. Right now, it's Scala for the web server. There's actually quite a lot of work in SQL, just because a lot of the logic is in designing the data model so that you can accurately model a business case. It's a web app. We're in the browser. JavaScript and its assorted transpiled variants are the only game in town. So it is what it is. We try to find a variant that is actually a modern language, which is also kind of why we chose Scala. It's kind of a good compromise between, there are a lot of libraries because it's in the JVM, and it also has a decent version of good type checking, a good ability to kind of mix in the Haskell-ish monadic programming when it's useful. It's not the best at those things, but it has them while also having that great, compatibility with existing legacy stuff. I'm sure there's a similar, I don't know what the equivalent language is in the .NET world. I'm sure there is one. Probably there's an equivalent. Yeah, that's kind of what you approach with using Flow in JavaScript. Yeah. So for hiring, we actually finally got some investment in terms of managing costs. We've been mostly working with contractors abroad, but we finally have Bay Area full-time, the level of money for a full-time Bay Area engineer. You can email me personally at asa@parsleyapp.com.
asa@parsleyapp.com.
Yeah, and that's basically it.
I forgot to mention we are looking for UX designers too, and we work with a lot of remote people everywhere, so we're totally comfortable with that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Unleaded says, Peter, what about Rust?
I guess I should mention. So we do where we may be performance constrained in a Rails environment on some things. We tend to make up for those limitations by writing like Rust libraries that we used to do with C and an FFI, but now we use a lot of Rust. So internally there are some Rust libraries that we've found to be that we've written internally, and a lot of the Rust ecosystem is growing really fast. So we're kind of proud to say we're working in that world too a little bit.
Another thing about the stack is that we sort of within each of our app servers, we encapsulate our app in Docker so that it is very easy to deploy. It makes it very easy to make sure that you have a consistent environment regardless of the server setup. It also makes it very easy to have a development environment that is almost exactly like, we don't use it for any of the scaling. It's all just about consistency. Like our development environment entirely simulates the AWS environment. We have Scala app in a Docker container. We have a Postgres server in a separate container. And we link those two up basically exactly as we would in production. So that's very useful.
Awesome. Well, really great stuff today, guys. Such great information. Thank you all for watching. Again, we had Asa from Parsley, Nish and Peter from Agrian. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Shall we say our goodbyes?
Had a blast, and we will see you next week for episode 4, right?
Yep, we will be in New York next week, and the theme will be FinTech. So see you all in New York.
Awesome. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one.